What is going on, guys? In today's video, I will show you the best Vex build in Borderlands 4. So, this is a true minion-focused Deadringer setup that turns the Vex into a battlefield commander rather than just a frontline brawler. Instead of charging into the danger, this build leans into the strategy by letting our Reaper army do almost all the DPS, while you sit back and amplify their power. These aren't just basic summons, the Vex Spectres are lethal extensions of your build that scale directly off your gun's damage and the crit multipliers. I'd say you need to think of them as the ghostly assassins, so constantly applying pressure while you play the commander, by setting up kills and amplifying their destruction. The magic of this build is how efficient and smooth it feels to level. You don't have to go too deep into one skill tree, or wait for high level augments before the build turns on. Instead, you're cherry picking key nodes across the blue and the green trees by stacking immediate value that multiplies the Vex output while making your Spectres reliable in every fight. They handle the crowd control, and when bosses show up, that's where the Deadringers will truly shine. The Spectres are deceptively strong, but what pushes this build over the edge is how effortless it scales. Every new weapon, every rep kit, and every augment you find will simply translate into more firepower for your minions. While other builds require specific legendaries to work, this one tries on basic things, like the big damage bonus, crit multipliers, and sustain uptime on the Deadringer. So overall, this build outputs ridiculous amounts of damage, and the best part is that you can realistically use almost any gun, so shotguns, snipers, and even mid-tier AR slots will work beautifully. It's also one of the most entertaining builds to play, so you're watching an army of the Spectres swarm enemies, and that really never gets old. The only real count to this setup is that it's very kill dependent, so if you're not chaining kills, you feel weak, but as long as you're summoning, you're going to be dominating enemies in seconds. And remember, if you want to check this build, look up the best items, the skill trees, and path of building, then check my link in the description. And before we continue, thanks to Damn Mods. They are a pro website that provides Borderlands 4 services like cheap items, custom builds, for example the one-shot Vex build, and even account boosting with fast delivery and much more. They also have more than 3,000 positive comments on Trustpilot with 4.9 stars, and this website is really worth a try, so make sure to use my discount code KATE for up to $100 off. So let's take a look at our skill tree. The backbone of this build is a clever mix between the blue and the green, by maximizing crits, empowering your minions, and making sure that the Deadringer feels like constant rather than a short burst. We start in the blue tree and get the Cold Iron. This one is fundamental pick because it immediately buffs our crit damage, which not only enhances our guns, but also directly boosts your Spectres, since they scale off the same damage multipliers. From there, we pivot into the green tree for Grave Sight and the Grave Implements. These are two cornerstone nodes that supercharge both our own precision damage and the effectiveness of our summons. Right out of the gate, you're stacking crit multipliers that make both you and your army terrifying. And this is where the build really is different from the typical rush capstone mentality. Instead of just investing points into one tree, just to unlock a flashy top-end skill, we cherry pick the most valuable nodes. That means grabbing Grave Assault for cooldown sustain, then the Grain Fields for the stacking damage buffs, and Prismatic Weaponry for the weapon synergy. You don't need to chase flashy mechanics, because the run numbers will carry this build. Then by the mid-game, we're layering in sustain and utility. Material components will feed into both, so personal DPS and the minion scaling, while recurrence will create a feedback loop where kills will feed from the power in your Spectres. If you're feeling squishy, then the Blood Sacrifice is for survivability. It trades some health to keep you in the fight, and because your Spectres are cleaning up mobs for you, you usually recoup that investment instantly. And then there's the flexibility. If you happen to snag the penetration augment on your throwing knife, then you can shift some points into the Bloodletter, since guaranteed crits will suddenly make this bleed effect absurdly strong. However, if you don't get it, then that's not a problem. Just stick with the enhancement and the flat multipliers for more consistent leveling curve. The whole psychology here is adaptability. You're not locked into one rigid structure, but on the other hand, we're building around the gear and the jobs you get, while keeping the minions and the crits at our center of our setup. Now let's talk gear, because equipment is where this build goes from strong to devastating. The absolute must-have piece is the Penetrator augment for the throwing knives. This thing is ridiculous, as it effectively turns every toss into a guaranteed crit. When you pair that with the Bloodletter, you're looking at insane damage over time stacks that melt bosses in seconds. It's rare, but if you can find it, then never let it go. It remains relevant all the way through the campaign. Then for the guns, here's the beauty. Almost any kinetic weapon will work, because this build leans into the crit scaling and the kinetic multipliers, you don't require one specific drop. That said, the shotguns are the clear winners, because simply, their high base damage gets multiplied so hard by the crit bonuses. A Jacob shotgun with a crit ricochet effect will work, but even a mid-tier Vladov AR or the dual burst rifle can work as well. Then underbarrel attachments add another layer of power. You want to get spread launchers, knife launchers and the shotgun underbarrels, as they are top tier, especially since they have internal cooldowns that you can bypass by the weapon swapping. This means if you're running multiple guns with strong underbarrels, then you can chain them endlessly for insane amount of burst windows. Then the rep kits are our pacing tool. The EMP damage payloads will make your shotguns and the snipers punch like a truck. Cooldown reduction will keep the dead ringer on the field more often, and lifesteal or the movement speed will help to smooth out our survivability gaps. And the psychology here is simple. Prioritize the raw base damage, then stack the crit multipliers, and let your specters scale alongside. Unlike other builds that need specific synergies, the Dead Ringer Vex is forgiving, so you can just use what you find and the build still works. Now onto the upgrades and the class mods. Throwing Knife will benefit massively from the damage EMP payload, which stacks perfectly with the penetrator to turn each crit into a nuclear strike. For the rep kit, the three best options will remain consistent, so 200% EMP damage, 100% cooldown rate or lifesteal or the movement speed. You're not really tanky by design, so any healing or the pacing tool that you can stack will make the gameplay feel much smoother. On top of it, class mods are where the things get spicy. They're harder to get early on, so don't stress too much, but ideally you want to look for anything that buffs the grave site, the best defenses or the bloodletter. If you're lucky enough to have the penetration, even a small percentage boost will translate into big gains, because of how much your minions will multiply your stats. So think of mods here as the force multipliers. They don't define this build, but they just push it to the next level. Then when it comes to farming, if you're looking for a reliable early game farming spot, then Sydney Pointy Legs in the Hungering Plain is the perfect for this build. The wave of Reapers will give you a ton of momentum, and the boss will melt quickly thanks to your burst damage. The encounter will drop solid loot, and once you've captured the drill site, you can reset it endlessly with the Moxies and Core Machine. Beyond that, the usual XP and the loot grinds will apply, so stick to the contracts, the side quests and farmable bosses whenever you feel underleveled, since the build scales so well with the gear, so you always feel a power spike whenever you get a bigger shield or even a gun that slots cleanly into our gameplay. And now finally, let's see how to actually play this build. The rhythm is methodical but incredibly rewarding. So step 1 is to always show your ordnance and start building kills. The moment that you activate the Ringer, summon your minions onto the high ground or into position, with clean line of sight on the enemy groups. Positioning will matter, as specters are not the smartest, but if you place them well, then they will shred through the enemies much more efficiently. Once they are out, your job is to maintain the tempo, so keep chaining kills to feed your kill skills, and rotate between the guns and the throwing knives to maximize the crit uptime. You need to think of yourself as the enabler, so you're setting the stage for your specters, weakening priority targets and applying crit multipliers. Pacing is everything. If you slow down, then you feel it. Skills will drop down and sustain falters, and even the Dead Ringer's cooldowns will leave you exposed. But when you play aggressively, keeping momentum alive, then the build snowballs. Every kill stacks higher, every crit hits harder, and your Reaper army grows more relentless. And this is my favorite part, where most builds will start strong but taper off as the fighter goes on. The Dead Ringer Vex will ramp up. The longer you fight, the more unstoppable you feel, until the entire room collapses under your army, and you're left to pick up the weapons, while the whole battlefield gets destroyed.